Hey
everyone, today's conversation is, as my guest calls it, a medical affairs potpourri. So if you are interested in conversations about cross-functional teams with marketing, if you are interested in conversations about how to work with KOLs and sort of our face-to-face meetings coming back, we aim to hopefully get into things like mentorship, maybe talk a little bit about training and what that looks like in this new world. This is a conversation for you. Our guest today is the senior MSL at Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease Neurology. This is Darshan Talks live stream. Our guest today is David Johnson, and I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney. David and I are both pharmacists, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. I have to clarify, I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney, so it's not legal advice. David and I are both pharmacists, but it's not clinical advice. Also, neither David nor I represent our companies or our clients. So these are just our conversations that are happening from an educational standpoint to really just shoot the breeze, if you will. I hope that I got that right, but we'll figure it out. I think it might actually, I was really going for shoot the shit. But these are considerations and don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the host, guests, or their employers or clients. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe, please share. Please feel free to ask our guest questions. You can always reach me on Twitter at Darshan Talks or visit my website at DarshanTalks.com. You can actually go to David on LinkedIn, and this is how you can find him. David, how are you?
I'm doing well, my friend. I always say, it's always good to shoot the shit as long as you don't land in it. So
really good line. I've never seen the second part of that. That's a good corollary.
I'm doing well. Busy, but well.
So David, let's start from the beginning. You said that the last few weeks have been busy for you. You've talked a little bit about your working in cross-functional teams, and specifically you're working with marketing. So my first question is, isn't that the one thing medical affairs should not be doing, i.e. working with marketing? So tell me how you guys work in a way that is not problematic.
Oh, for sure. That is a dance with complicated steps, but the mediator is your compliance business partners. And, when our team was approached with needing, so this is a advisory board that's going to have, people on it on, both sides. And this is legal from the compliance and regulatory stance to do. But you always obviously have to be maintaining and thinking about compliance rules, generally. And this happens with a lot of medical affairs group where they have their medical team and their commercial team, typically on very high levels working together. But when you have lower levels like, lowly MSLs like myself working with, of course, you need to be very walking in step with what compliance is. So off the bat, after our first call with them, it was typing up to compliance and saying, okay, what are the rules of the road to make sure that we're doing this right, not just for us and for our group or our company, but for patients. These rules are there for obvious good reasons, and we want to make sure that we walk the lane appropriately.
So what are the big takeaways your compliance team has told you to make sure? Obviously, there'll be more, so this is not comprehensive. But for the most part, what are some of the big rules compliance and legal told you to follow in these engagements?
One of the big things that you'll find, I think, especially, certainly people in pharma know this, but, folks who are aspiring or transitioning into pharma, and we talked about this a little bit both on our subsequent or our previous meetings, was MRCs and PRCs. So these promotional boards that review materials, and then these medical boards that review materials. And really, one of the major things is what you plan on displaying and talking about, which has been approved by a PRC or an MRC, that's what you need to stick to in terms of the proactive material that you talk. So you can't just be, saying things off the cuff or leading discussions proactively. And really, from a medical standpoint, because certainly questions may come up and can be answered reactively, but you really still need to stay within a box of particular things when you talk about stuff. And so making sure that you are focused on, addressing a question if it's for medical, but also not deviating into other pastures that may be more specific. In the case where, especially from medical side, where you'd want to have a deeper conversation, that's the point where you answer the question concisely and to the point, and briefly, concisely, and then you follow up with that KOL and say, let's talk more about this offline, where we can, discuss a little bit more in detail. So, it really, some might see it being restrictive, but it really actually can not only build trust, but open the gateway to even more intimate and relationship building discussions later on.
So what you're saying is what you're looking at. So you're just to be clear for other people who don't have the context, you're really talking about in the context of an ad board. This is how that conversation would take place. Before we get to that part of it, let's start from the beginning. What are the forums in which non-senior leadership in medical affairs engages with non-senior leadership in sales and marketing? Is it just in the context of ad boards, or is it other contexts? Where have you seen that come up?
I think every single day that you're in the field or working, you're working cross-functionally. And that's why, again, it's important, I'm going to sound like one of the, learning modules that everybody has at their work when working cross-functionally, but it really helps you guideline. I said it's a dance, and a dance with complicated steps that, everybody needs to be in rhythm, but everybody needs to know their role. And so you're dealing with people cross-functionally every single day, whether it's your sales rep or, regional account manager, whatever they call them, or a, thought leader liaison, TLL on the commercial side. However you're dealing with on the commercial side, you need to know those rules so that you can, I don't want to use a game mechanism because, you're dealing with people's lives and everything, but Monopoly has rules. You play the game according to the rules, and you can, win at Monopoly. And, you need to be able to, everybody wants to do a good job, but you can't do a good job unless you know the rules of how to do a good job, scientifically, medically, as well as ethically and compliance.
Which really raises that question, and let's clarify for the audience. You can win at Monopoly. What does winning look like?
That's a great question, and I had very, it's you hesitate sometimes to use the word win when you're thinking about, medicine and stuff generally, right. But win has peers to it, right? So obviously in any profession or anything, people want to do well at their job, so it's going to be defined at what is doing well doing. But I think when you look at the standpoint of a company, winning essentially means, are your actions lining up with the mission and goals of your company? Are you putting patients first? Are you following the science? Are you, if you look at, some companies, I won't say their name particularly, but I know them very well. One of their goals is to play to win. And so you're out there in the midst of doing this, caring about patients, engaging people, building, empowering people, patients, and coworkers in order to be in this arena to win. And as you say, win can be defined again as many, sub-levels and thresholds of that. I think first and foremost, it goes to, my role is to provide clinicians with the most up-to-date clinical evidence that is in our, supported by our research and our data, engage those clinicians to generate future research and data, and also, identify insights. All of this boils and gets churned and mixed into providing optimal care for patients. I'm a, pharmacist. Many of all my team members are either clinicians, physicians, there are actually, DMPs on our team. Now there's many layers of various healthcare providers on our team, and, clinical scientists. And our goal is fixated on patient care. And I think that really goes, even past our company or our team. And that really is the goal for medical science liaisons. All of those words in there are particular to the job that we do. And so I think winning, first and foremost, puts the patient on top. And you can't do that, unless you're playing, the rules of the game, because you have trust, and trust is a part of winning, and a lot of those compliance rules are undergirded by the want to have trust within an industry, which is sometimes so mysterious in its nature. Whether you take science, which is mysterious, medicine, which is very mysterious, or just business in general, which can be mysterious. And so reinforcing trust in an arena like that is paramount to winning and having success.
So you talk about having this trust, building this trust, but the last year or so, as you pointed out, has been difficult. You've almost gone back 50 years to try to rebuild some of that trust, because you didn't lose that just from an industry perspective. If anything, I think the Edelman scores and stuff suggest that the industry gained some points in trust. But at an interpersonal level, Zoom calls can only do so much in terms of building that trust. How did you work towards building that trust with patients, with caregivers, with healthcare practitioners, and or with your team, and or with other teams like commercial and marketing?
I think that's a great question, but I think it really goes back to what we all, by we, I mean, folks who have had, any sort of medical training, physicians, pharmacists, dentists, nurses, folks who have had intensive training from that standpoint, is, you, speaking as a pharmacist, number one, you follow the science and you follow the evidence. And when you engage with people, it's with that kind of core in mind. I'm not trying to fool anyone. I'm not trying to, and from coming from a medical, the medical side of things in industry, our job inherently is non-promotional. And so, if you are truly going there with science and, those things in mind, then your customer, the person you're talking to, KOL or research person, whomever, certainly can know that your role is supported by the fact that you're really just giving them science. So they know that you're not there to, promote things, and then you go in there and you just have a scientific conversation. That also, in terms of, there are certainly instances where you have to regain trust, right? Maybe it's a situation where you messed up, or a situation where a previous person messed up, or maybe your company as a whole messed up or something. And that's where you go back to the core principles. When I was in the hospital working on the wards, you present things fair and balanced. And you say, well, this is the evidence that supports this. These are the things that don't support it. Or this is the great efficacy. This is the not so great safety. Or this is the efficacy and safety, whatever it is, so that people can make clear decisions. And I think, kind of going back to the patient, when you are thinking to yourself, ultimately, this information is going to go and support a patient, you're like, whoa, I really need to make sure that I'm giving this person really clear advice. Because if I just sure, it's great if for our company's bottom line and investors and things, or anybody's company's bottom line and investors, if a product gets sold, but that's not what this is necessarily, all about. A soda maker doesn't just want to sell a bunch of sodas and have everybody, just have their first bad soda and then croak. They want people to like the soda, enjoy the soda, understand why they're having the soda, and really want it, the second time. And that takes, good science. Obviously, I'm not talking about sodas, but that takes good science, that takes trust, And it takes that type of relationship building to support all of that.
So you mentioned this really important piece, which is in the end, you're doing all of this in the interest of patients. And we're all doing this. I mean, let's be honest, even in a legal role, that's why you do what you're doing. If that's true, one of the key questions that we currently have a sort of battleground fight on is this question of who does communications with patients, who does that belong to? Is it MSLs, especially when you're talking about patient-centric engagement, lay summaries, trying to explain complex, like the patient centricity angle that has become more and more important? Or does it belong to promotion because they have to stay on label, they can only speak direct to consumer, they can speak direct to consumer, not only, they can speak direct to consumer. And what, in your opinion, and again, not tying this to Alexion or anything, but in your opinion, where does patient centricity belong?
No, I think that's great. Number one, in my short career in med affairs as an MSL, I've not seen or had MSLs be asked to engage patients. And I think there are a lot of good reasons for that. However, I think patient centricity, not to sound cheesy, really belongs everywhere. It's like saying, where does diversity belong? Or
a department in the basement.
So it's like my specific point being like, where does a group who thinks about diversity belong, right? And like, and then again, of course, bringing it back to patient centricity, that mindset or that ability to think back to the patient has to be in every single group. It has to be in medical, it has to be in commercial, it has to be in research, it has to be in medical affairs, it has to be in marketing, it needs to be in obviously case management and things along those lines. And you have to think about patient centricity from the beginning of your drug development. I mean, just from a simplistic standpoint, someone might scoff at, researchers thinking about patient centricity. Well, how are you designing your drug in terms of the half-life or the dosing regimen or your clinical trial design? Exactly. Are you going to be able to get patients in those? And then obviously that goes all the way into your promotion. Are you thinking about the people who are going to be taking this medication? Is your promotion, your advertisement, your marketing directed towards this, particular type of group?
So what I hear you saying is everyone needs to own that part of it. But let's be honest, in the end, someone's going to have to engage and say, you know what, we're going to be the ones that share conversations on, for example, I'm not sure you've dealt with this issue yet, and you probably haven't from an MSL standpoint, but in Europe, there's a requirement for lay summaries. Are you familiar with what they are?
A requirement for what summaries?
Oh, lay summaries or plain language summaries. Essentially what they are.
I have heard of this, yes. And I've read some.
Okay. So essentially plain language summaries or lay summaries are when you take a journal article and you simplify it so that the patient can understand, for example, which study they participated in and why they participated in that and what was the result of that study. The question is, are patients able to do that, or does that become sort of promotional when it's not been approved for that condition? So it falls into that super gray area of what should we do about off-label information that agencies across the world are saying we want patients to have this information because it's quite honestly them participating in the studies. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think certainly that to underscore that is, you're looking at patients and lay patients, but who is your patient? Are you targeting, from that lay script? And I assume likely they're targeting, sixth grade, reading
Yeah.
level or something along those lines. But is that your patient population? And therein you have an even deeper segmentation of what you need to identify in terms of addressing this population. And another kind of point to remember this too, it's great to have the right information, scientific information that's simplified. We live in a day and age now where the facts, everybody has their own set of facts on what's truth and what's not truth. And so you exactly, you almost need to have a lay description of what your how your measurements are working, because if people don't believe statistics or don't know how to interpret statistics, then you can explain, in a simple, you can have SpongeBob on your package insert, and it's still not going to be easy to for just the layperson to interpret.
So I guess my question for you is that the FDA is a big advocate, by the way, of patient engagement, patient centricity, which I'm sure you already know. My question for you is, do you see the future where there's going to be MSLs, sales reps, HEOR reps, and now patient engagement reps who fall between this mixture of clinical understanding and yet for the lay audience? Is that the next future, or do you think we're still 5, 6, 7, 10 years away from that?
No, I don't think that's the future. I think that's the present. I think that places, the name of the game is, from a, business perspective, is getting people on therapy. If that is a roadblock to you, you take, I forget, I'm not going to say, a name of a drug or a company or anything, but like take, there was a common antipsychotic medication that you needed, I think it was antipsychotic medication that had a REMS on it, that has a REMS on it, and like navigating provider and patient through that REMS is challenging. Yeah. Well, organizations, not even this one specifically, but organizations have people that help guide provider and patient through these things. Oh, you're having issues, you change your insurance, no problem. We have someone to help you with that. Oh, you didn't, physician so-and-so, you didn't sign up in our REMS. Well, here's another reminder. Here, click on this thing. We'll help you do that. And so I think there are already people that are helping folks through the process. And that's an element of patient centricity. And I think, there are going to be things even more so. I think when you start seeing more genetic, specific drugs and, these things, you're going to have, organizations and, companies like, 23andMe, then grouping with maybe a pharmaceutical company and saying like, I don't know the legal rules about them selling information, but once you sign that thing to send it off, you probably agreed to sell your information. maybe.
They actually did do that. There was a whole issue with that, by the way.
Yeah.
Because Ancestry.com sold all their data, I forget to whom, for $500 million.
There you go. And then you have a potential way for people to, and again, all this, in the world of now where we're so concerned about our privacy, yet we have a million different profiles on every, stretch of the internet. But like, those things can sound invasive, but they're generally meant to be helpful to you, the patient, but also helpful to the company in their bottom line. So, I think that, going back to our specific point, having people who are going to be involved in engaging patients directly, I think is going to be the new thing. And in some ways, we already have that, right? We have direct to consumer, commercials and advertising and things along those lines. We have direct to consumer advertising. I think this might be even more specific direct to consumer engagement.
Yeah.
that has a broader, reach to it as we move forward. Oh, this is great.
Yeah. So your point about 23andMe doing it, kind of already are, and this is actually from, just so you know, December 5th, 2018.
So yeah.
So the other part that we're talking about this perspective, as you pointed out, we have point solutions already, for example, in reimbursement, that get into the issue of let me help you with the reimbursement, or let me help you get onto the REMS and solve that. But one of the things that MSLs do in the end, for example, is basically play quarterback. And they go and address 50 different problems from 50 different places within and outside the company. Do you think we're going to have the equivalent of that? But MSLs really primarily do that for HCPs.
Mm-hmm.
Sales and marketing, sales does it for HCPs as well, and marketing really doesn't quarterback really for the most part. So my question is, do you think that there will be a patient quarterback, for lack of a better term?
I think there may be a reactive patient quarterback versus MSLs and people in sales being reactive and proactive.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be given our American culture, and I'm not European, but Europeans tend to be even more strict on personal privacy and things along those lines.
Very much so. Yep.
I would think that there would be a high bar to allow proactive engagement on medical issues from like a company who's, like I said, at the end of the day, there are investors who may not necessarily be 100% engaged in patient care, but certainly want to see your return on their investment from a monetary standpoint. So I feel like I would be surprised to see that, but I think definitely once there is a patient in play, then there will be, there will certainly be quarterbacking from engagement with them, and there already is. And so, I'd be interested to understand what would be the scenario where there would be a proactive engagement other than direct to consumer. That's why I think, potentially maybe there'd be a direct to consumer engagement. And I think, again, never say never. I think the limitations that you have to that is there enough data that's specific enough to make it worthwhile for a company? We could go back to a soda company, to have them have someone, and it probably wouldn't even be a person at this point. It would be, like an AI that sounds like a human being, or an email or a text or something, engage you and say, hey, I know, like, they know that you get thirsty at about 1:30 every day, to send you a text message saying, hey, wouldn't you like a super pop soda right now, and just engage and say, hey, they sell super pop soda right at the drugstore right around the corner. It's only going to take you approximately 32 seconds to walk there. And by the way, you can pick all these other things up that you need. I can tell that you're running low on olive oil or whatnot. And so will there be an equivalency of that type of engagement from a drug standpoint? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Again, I'm not a data scientist or anywhere near it, but I think the limitation is probably the ability of AI to do that and the resources to engage people. But, it's probably only a matter of time, technology-wise, but certainly threshold legal-wise in terms of that type of engagement. But, who can predict of what kind of society technically will be to permit or dissuade those types of engagements from happening?
So I'll give you a couple parting thoughts before we because we can keep going and we're nowhere close to that. That was just the first topic we were going to get into. And we have 5 more. But just as an FYI, the FDA just came out, and I think they've organized either an office or some version of a grouping where they've basically said that we're going to try to figure out how to deal with the First Amendment. Essentially, I don't know exactly how familiar you are with this part of it, but the FDA has lost 6 court cases on, at least 6, that probably are more, on whether pharmaceutical companies can engage in off-label discussions.
Ooh. From
right.
a freedom of speech standpoint?
From a freedom of speech
wow.
standpoint. I had a conversation with a Harvard lawyer who basically said, why is the pharma industry different? If everyone can have this conversation, why is the pharma industry different? And it's in there. You can sort of look at the analysis, the conversation that went along with it. The question then becomes, in a world where those conversations and the FDA basically, just so you have context, the FDA put out either a 56 or 63-page memo with 23 different options on how they can deal with off-label speech. And they ended it with, we don't really like any of them. So you tell us what you like, because we want to consider it.
Wow.
So the question is, what happens to MSLs and medical affairs in a world where the limitations on off-label speech are not, you can't have them, but that they have to be truthful and not misleading?
So number one, some of my thoughts may be a bit old school. Audience can check the gray hair, and I haven't had a haircut in a while, so it's very prominent. To that point, I think that, there are companies and then there are individuals. And within those individuals, they typically are individuals who come from a profession. You and I come from the profession of pharmacy and law. And I don't know a lot about law, but I do know that when you become a pharmacist, you take an oath. And you take an oath.
I don't remember doing that, but sure.
Pharmacists take an oath of the Maimonides.
Some pharmacists do. Yes. Going on.
Before they at their hooding. And so this oath, I don't know by heart, and I don't know a lot about it, but the essence of it is like any medical oath, the Hippocratic oath and whatnot. And it's to essentially be true to your patient first, be true to facts, and be true to, being balanced and having a clinical mind that continues to expand and grow. So I say all of that to say, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Because we started our conversation with trust. The trust that you build with your KOLs, with your patients, with society, oftentimes is based on the standards that you set for yourself as an individual, person, company, industry, whatnot. And so I think though you could have a discussion talking about anything, or a promotional conversation talking about anything, because it's your freedom of speech to do that, doesn't mean it's necessary to be good. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. Having commercial people talk about off-label things, or having MSLs proactively talk about off-label things, might be the equivalent of screaming out fire in a movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there are limitations that are a good idea, if not for anything, then for maintaining the trust and confidence, albeit precarious at sometimes, that folks have in the industry that makes medicines for them.
I think I 100% agree with you that there is tremendous value to MSLs, medical affairs, HEOR as well, and sales. I feel like they all serve very different functions. I think they all have different levels of trust for different functions. So in no way was I minimizing the value of medical affairs. But the point I was making was, I can see a point where someone is going, I have to cut my costs down so that I can show an increase in shareholder profits. Where is my greatest cost coming from? And someone who doesn't intrinsically understand the super important role that medical affairs plays. That's
Oh,
what
I see what you're saying. So is the question, do I see, given that potentially on the horizon, sales folks could have a scientific engagement, off-label conversation with the PI, what therefore becomes of the role of the MSL?
Yes.
So let me first say, I love my salespeople. I love everybody in commercial. I know you hear a big butt walking its way up, and you're right. But I think there is a role for because MSLs aren't just MSLs, right? They are, the relationships that they build are, I think, almost by definition, are supposed to be peer level relationships.
Right.
And that peer level relationship, I'm not trying to be elitist by whatever type of degree someone has, but it's related to the background of previous work that the person has done in their past. I think it makes a peer or makes a colleague, not necessarily a letters after your name or anything along those lines. However, obviously, frequently letters tend to follow peers in a group and things along those lines, but not always and necessarily. So I think that peer-to-peer collegial relationship that exists between medical affairs and the KOLs that they interact with is important. And it's important to keep the line very clear that, hey, I'm not just here trying to sell you something. And I think that is ultimately why, I think that's ultimately why it's going to be difficult for a model like that to be, to translate into business. And let me give you like a quick example. It's kind of, it's somewhat related, but not exactly related. There was a study recently, or I don't know, it was a study, but I don't know where to cite it. And I heard it on like NPR, so take this with a little bit of salt. But they looked at what happens when a new company, a competitor company, comes out with a drug, and how does the marketing group respond to that competitor, and what does that mean for sales of the marketing group who responded to it. And so they had different cohort or different types of tests set up. One, when this new drug came out, the opposing company came out with like ads against it and was like, well, this is why Exodron or whatever is a better agent. There were also places where they didn't do anything and they just kept it down, so kind of controlled, if you will. And then there was another one where the company said positive things, or it was like, oh, we want to congratulate so and so on coming into the market and providing things for patients. Would you believe, and I don't know if this is statistically significant, but compared to having a negative ad versus having a positive welcoming ad, the positive welcoming ad companies did better in sales that year than they did as compared to, so I guess it was statistically significant, as compared to giving a negative ad. So I say this whole thing to say, it is good to not just be focused on sales, because people know when you're just trying to make a buck. And I'm not a salesperson, and I'm certainly not here saying that salespeople are only worried about making a buck. That is not entirely true. Many, if not all, my sales colleagues are extremely passionate about patient care, even if they don't have a background in medicine themselves. They're extremely passionate. I think that drives a lot of people. I say this kind of like, thinking of like industries and business in general. If you're only focused on your making the dollar, then I think you lose sight on what is creating the environment for you to be successful. And here comes this word again, win, which has many different, languages or many different definitions, but ultimately has patients, I think, if you're in a patient care setting, at the top of that, pyramid.
I love it. As you know, David, we can keep having this conversation. There's so much more to unwrap here. Love to have you back, obviously. Before we go, because we're like 20 minutes past where we really should be. First of all, how can people reach you?
People can reach me on my LinkedIn, that is on the screen right now.
And what are some parting words?
I think, parting words are, first off, Happy New Year, everyone, and Happy Chinese New Year, I think this week or next week. I think, I forget what year it is. I think it's the year of the tiger, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But, it's I think, a year of rebirth and kind of renewal. I have been, I kid you not, trying to get focused on preparing myself to go back out in the world, specifically for work in the field, trying to get my diet right.
So wrong, by the way. Those words sound so wrong coming from you.
What do you mean?
Preparing myself to go work in the field.
You are messed up. But that's hilarious, though. You're messed up. I'm preparing myself to go back to MSLing work as it normally is, which is called in the field. You're hilarious. I need to up my my historical references of India in the South Asian continent. But anyways, yeah. So I'm preparing myself, and really trying to get ready mentally, physically, eating better, making sure I fit in the suits, getting my mind right to be able to have, snappy conversations with KOLs. And, I think for people looking at this, prepare yourself for a better day, not the same day.
I love it. I've already gotten feedback that I should not have said what I said to you, so I apologize.
Listen, on that point, there are historical, America, just like every place and many, has a painful history of subjugation of not just, women, poor people, African Americans, the list goes on and on. We move together when, number one, we respect each other. So it would be hard for you to make that reference if we didn't have a level of respect and love and caringness about each other, obviously. But I think it's important for people to also know that we move together when we can have a shared compassion and understanding about each other's histories, and be able to, I might get burned on this, but be able to laugh about things. I think sometimes, and educate. You don't need education on that topic, and educate. So I can understand that comment being very difficult for people who don't know you or I on the level that we know each other. But educate your friends about different histories and cultures, for sure. Definitely do that. But also, when the education has been done and the love and the commonality is there, don't feel too weighed down by the history of peoples in your culture to not be able to laugh at funny things that are funny, especially when they're meant to be funny.
For sure. David, this was amazing having you on. Thank you again for not canceling me.
I'm not the one you have to worry about canceling you.
We got to plan this again soon. Thank you again for coming on. We'll talk soon.
Yes, sir.